Halloween night is always one of those times when anything can happen. Kids run through the streets, dressed as witches, monsters, and superheroes, their laughter echoing as they collect candy. And sometimes, older teens like us sneak in a little mischief to keep things interesting. That's part of the fun, right? But last Halloween, something happened that I can't shake off. It wasn't a typical scare, no cheesy jump scare, no haunted house trick. What happened to me was far more real and far worse. The night had started off just like any other Halloween. My friends and I weren't into trick or treating anymore, but we figured we'd hit up a few houses for candy, hang out, and maybe head to a party later. I was dressed as Jason Voorhees' machete, fake blood, and all. My two friends, Chris and Ethan, had thrown together last-minute costumes, Chris as Ghostface and Ethan as a werewolf. They weren't great costumes, but it didn't matter. Halloween wasn't about looking perfect, it was about having fun. We were halfway through the night when we decided to split up. Chris and Ethan wanted to check out a haunted house attraction on the edge of town. I wasn't feeling it though. Jump scares aren't really my thing, so I told them I'd meet them later. We agreed to meet back at the park in about an hour. By then, it was close to 10 p.m., and the trick-or-treaters were heading home. The streets were clearing out, and the festive excitement of the night was fading into the stillness that only comes after hours of activity. I was walking alone, taking the long way around the neighborhood, when I heard a voice behind me. "Hey, kid." I turned around and saw a man walking toward me, dressed in a police uniform. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just making sure everyone was behaving, keeping an eye on things. But as he got closer, something felt wrong. His uniform didn't look like the ones I'd seen other officers wearing that night. It was old and worn, like it hadn't been replaced in years. And there was no police car in sight, just him, walking alone on the sidewalk. "There's a curfew," he said, his voice steady but cold. "You need to head home." I was confused. Curfew? I hadn't heard anything about a curfew, and none of my friends had mentioned it either. Plus, I'd seen other kids out just minutes before. Something didn't add up. "Curfew?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but feeling a twinge of unease. "It's been enforced tonight. No one's supposed to be out after 10 p.m., he replied, taking another step closer. His eyes were fixed on me, but not in a way that made me feel safe. They were too intense, too focused. There was no concern in them, just cold insistence. I forced a smile, trying to play it cool. "I'm just meeting my friends at the park," I said, trying to sound like it was no big deal. "I'll be heading home soon." "I'll walk you," he said, his voice firm. "Make sure you get there safely." That's when the alarm bells really started going off in my head. Why would a cop need to walk me to a park? There were still other people around, and nothing seemed dangerous. And why wasn't he in a car like the other officers I'd seen? I took a step back, my pulse quickening. "No, it's fine," I said, trying to sound polite but wanting to get away. "My mom's picking me up at the park in a few minutes." That wasn't true. I was 17 and more than capable of walking around on my own. But something about this guy was setting off every red flag I had, and I wanted him to think I wasn't alone. The man's expression didn't change. He just stared at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, like he was sizing me up. He didn't move, but the tension in the air was growing thicker by the second. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he finally said, his voice dropping to a lower, more unsettling tone. "It's dangerous." There was something about the way he said that word dangerous that sent a chill down my spine. It didn't feel like a warning about something out there. It felt like a warning about him. "I'll be fine," I muttered, already reaching into my pocket for my phone. I pulled it out and pretended to dial my mom's number, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hey, Mom." "Yeah, I'm at the park. Can you come get me?" I kept talking, hoping the guy would take the hint and leave me alone. But instead, he took another step forward. "You know," he said, lowering his voice even more, "I can take you home. It's not safe out here. You don't want to get in trouble for breaking curfew, do you?" I took another step back, my heart racing. My fake phone call wasn't fooling him. His eyes shifted just enough for me to see the tension behind them. He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to trap me. "I'm just going to wait for my mom at the park," I said quickly, turning on my heel and walking away as fast as I could without breaking into a run. I didn't look back, but I could feel him watching me, his presence like a shadow creeping along behind me. I kept my phone pressed to my ear, pretending to talk, but my mind was racing. Was this guy really a cop? Or was he just some creep pretending to be one? Either way, I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't let him follow me all the way to the park. That's when I saw it. Chris's mom's car, parked up ahead. She was dropping off Chris and Ethan after the haunted house. Relief flooded through me as I jogged toward them, waving frantically. "Hey," I called, trying to sound casual, but I could feel the panic in my voice. Chris and Ethan got out of the car, laughing and talking about the haunted house. But when they saw my face, their smiles vanished. "Dude, what's wrong?" Chris asked, his voice serious now. "Some guy's been following me," I whispered, glancing over my shoulder. "He says he's a cop, but I don't think he's legit." Chris's mom must have noticed something was off because she rolled down her window. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she looked past me. "Yeah, I think so," I said, trying to force a smile. "But this guy, he says there's a curfew and I should go home, but something's not right." Without hesitation, she unlocked the doors. "Get in the car," she said, her voice firm. I didn't need to be told twice. I climbed into the back seat, and Chris and Ethan slid in beside me. As soon as the doors were shut, she pulled away, leaving the man standing alone at the end of the block. I watched him through the rearview mirror as we drove away, hoping that would be the last I ever saw of him. But the story didn't end there. When we got back to my house, I told my mom what had happened. She was furious, especially when she realized how long the guy had been following me. She called the police to report it, and that's when things got even stranger. The local precinct said they hadn't assigned any officers to patrol that area, and there was no curfew in effect. Whoever that man was, he wasn't a cop. He was pretending. For days, I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, the way they had locked onto mine, cold and empty. I kept wondering what would have happened if I hadn't pretended to call my mom, if I hadn't run into Chris and Ethan. What was he planning to do? Halloween is coming up again, but this year, I'm not taking any chances. I'm definitely not going out alone. Some monsters wear masks, but the scariest ones are the people who hide behind normal faces, pretending to be something they're not. Because whoever that man was, he's still out there. And he's probably still wearing that uniform, looking for someone else to fool. Not me. Not again. The back door was slightly ajar, and my stomach sank. I always locked it, didn't I? At least, I thought I did. I moved to close it, but just as my hand reached the handle, I heard something, a faint, almost imperceptible rustling sound. It was coming from the stairs. My breath caught in my throat as I froze in place, listening intently. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was in the house. 1,000 possibilities raced through my mind. Could it be my parents? Maybe they came back home early without letting me know. Or a neighbor? But none of that made sense. No one would come in through the back door without calling first, especially not in the middle of the night. My pulse quickened as I stepped away from the kitchen and toward the stairs, where the noise had come from. That's when I saw him. A figure tall, shadowy, and unmistakable was halfway up the staircase, standing completely still as if he was waiting for me to notice him. He was wearing a mask, a white, expressionless mask that caught the faint light filtering in from the window. My heart leaped into my throat as I stared at him. This wasn't some harmless trick or treater anymore. This was someone who had let themselves into my house. But why? I locked eyes with the figure, or at least where his eyes should have been behind the mask. He didn't move. He just stood there, frozen mid-step, like a statue, 1 foot on the stair, 1 foot off, as if he'd been caught in the act of sneaking up on me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but all I could feel was a growing panic gnawing at me. My phone was upstairs in my room, but I couldn't get past him to reach it. There was no way. My only option was to run. But where? I took a small step back, and that's when he moved a single, deliberate step forward, matching my movement. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What are you doing in my house?" He didn't answer. Just another slow, silent step in my direction. The floor creaked under his weight. Panic surged through me, and without thinking, I bolted. I turned on my heel and ran for the stairs, my feet pounding against the wooden floor as I raced up 2 steps at a time. I didn't look back, didn't dare to see if he was following me. My heart was slamming against my ribs, but I made it to my room. I slammed the door shut, locking it in one frantic motion, then pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath. For a few seconds, everything was silent. The only sound was my own labored breathing. No footsteps, no creaking floorboards, no sign of him coming after me. But I knew better than to think it was over. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone off the desk and dialed my mom. "Mom," I whispered frantically, trying to keep my voice down. "There's someone in the house." "What?" she gasped on the other end of the line. "What do you mean someone's in the house?" "I don't know," I cried, barely able to keep my voice steady. "I saw this guy earlier. I gave him candy, but now he's inside." "Call the police," she urged. "Lock yourself in your room and stay there. We're coming home right now." I hung up and immediately dialed 911. As I explained the situation to the dispatcher, I heard the footsteps again. Only this time, they were slower, more deliberate. He was walking down the hallway, just outside my door. I clutched the phone tighter, trying to stay calm as the dispatcher stayed on the line with me. The floor creaked with each step he took, the sound getting closer until it stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, my heart racing. Was he standing there, listening for me? Waiting? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I couldn't make a sound. Seconds dragged into minutes, and I stayed crouched behind the door, barely breathing. My pulse was so loud in my ears, it felt like it was echoing through the room. I was terrified that he could hear it too. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air. Relief washed over me like a wave. "The police are here," the dispatcher said calmly. "Stay where you are until they've cleared the house." I heard the pounding knock on the front door as the police arrived. I didn't wait long. As soon as I felt it was safe, I rushed downstairs to let them in. They searched the house from top to bottom, but the intruder was gone. The back door was still wide open, just the way I had found it, and a few scuff marks were left near the stairs. But there was no sign of the man in the mask. The police told me I had done the right thing by locking myself in and calling for help, but it didn't feel like I had won anything. A man had been inside my house. He had come so close to me. I didn't know what he wanted or why he chose our house. But knowing he had walked through the same halls made me feel sick. Even after the officers left, I couldn't stop thinking about him. What if he came back? I went around the house, checking every lock, windows, doors, even the basement hatch again and again, until I was sure everything was secure. Halloween was supposed to be fun, but this night had turned into something much darker. The day had started normal enough. I wasn't even supposed to go to the Halloween party that night. My friends had been bugging me about it for days, and I had turned them down a dozen times. I just wasn't in the mood. But a few hours before the party, they called again, insisting I come. Reluctantly, I threw on the only thing I had that could pass as a costume: a black hoodie, some skeleton face paint, and a pair of gloves with the fingers cut out. It wasn't much, but I figured it was better than nothing. The party was at Lucas's house, a huge place on the edge of town. His family always threw these big Halloween bashes that people talked about for weeks afterward. My best friend Danny picked me up around 8. As we drove through the streets, I watched the kids trick-or-treating from the car window. They were laughing, running from house to house in their bright costumes. It made me feel a little nostalgic. They were out having the kind of fun Halloween is supposed to be about, while I was on my way to a party where people were more interested in drinking than anything else. When we pulled up to Lucas's house, it was fully decked out, fake spider webs hanging from the roof, glowing jack-o'-lanterns on every step, and plastic skeletons swinging from the trees. The music was so loud, we could hear the bass thumping from the driveway. As soon as we got out of the car, I saw people already stumbling around the front yard with red Solo cups in hand. Danny was grinning, ready to party. "Looks like it's already going strong," he said, giving me a nudge. I just nodded, not really feeling the vibe. Inside, the house was packed. People were squeezed into every corner, and the music was even louder inside. The smell of cheap beer and sweat filled the air. I wandered through the crowd, trying to get into the mood, but something felt off. I had this nagging feeling that someone was watching me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Crowded parties can be weird like that, with all the noise and people. But then I saw him. A tall guy, wearing an old-fashioned suit and a full-face mask. It wasn't like any mask I'd seen at the party. It had a frozen grin and hollow, dark eyes, like something out of a really old horror movie. It gave me the creeps, but I figured it was just someone in costume. After all, it was Halloween. Except every time I moved, I noticed him again. In every room, every crowd, he was there, standing still, always watching me. I started feeling more uneasy as the night went on. It wasn't just a casual glance, it was like he was fixated on me. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave. As I made my way through the thinning crowd, I glanced back one more time, and there he was, standing in the corner of the room, staring right at me. His empty eyes locked onto mine. That's when I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just a party prank. My heart started racing, and I quickly looked away, hoping I was overreacting. But when I looked again, he was moving slowly, walking toward me. His steps were unnervingly calm, almost too slow. Like he knew I couldn't escape. Panic hit me hard. Without thinking, I turned and bolted down the hallway, weaving through people as fast as I could. I didn't even know where I was going, I just had to get out. The house felt like a maze, with every room blending into the next. My heart pounded in my ears as I reached the back door, throwing it open and stumbling into the yard. For a moment, I thought I was safe. I looked around, catching my breath, but the yard was empty. It was so dark and quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of music from the house. I let myself believe it was over, that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Then I heard it, the slow creak of the door behind me. I turned, and there he was, the masked man, standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't think twice. I ran. My legs burned as I sprinted across the yard toward the trees, hoping I could lose him in the woods. His footsteps echoed behind me, steady and unhurried. He wasn't running, just walking, like he had all the time in the world. I pushed through the branches, the twigs scratching my face and arms. But I didn't stop. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away from him. When I finally broke through the trees and reached the road, I glanced back. He had stopped at the edge of the woods, standing perfectly still under the pale moonlight. His head tilted to the side, like he was curious, but he didn't follow me onto the road. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I kept running until I saw Danny's car parked down the street. Danny was leaning against it, chatting with some girl I didn't recognize. I stumbled toward him, gasping for breath. "Dude, what's going on?" Danny asked, his face turning serious when he saw me. "There's a guy in a mask," I managed to say between breaths. "He's been following me." Danny's expression shifted from confusion to concern. He grabbed a flashlight from the car. "Let's go check it out." Reluctantly, I followed him back to the house. The yard was completely empty now, the party winding down. We walked toward the spot where I had last seen the masked man, but he was gone. "He was right here," I whispered, pointing to the edge of the woods. But there was no sign of him. Danny scanned the area with his flashlight, but found nothing. "Maybe it was just someone messing around," he said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. I didn't argue, but I knew what I saw. As we got back into the car and drove away, I couldn't stop glancing out the window, half expecting to see him again, watching from the trees. Every Halloween, I still wonder, will he show up again? And if he does, who will he come for next? If this story sent a chill down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe for more creepy tales. Got your own Halloween horror story? Drop it in the comments below. And remember, stay safe this Halloween. You never know what might be lurking in the dark.